"Mrs. Dempster," said Malcolmson gravely, making her a polite bow, "you know more than a senior wrangler. And let me say that as a mark of esteem for your indubitable soundness of head and heart, I shall, when I go, give you possession of this house, and let you stay here by yourself for the last 2 months of my tenancy, and for 4 weeks will serve my purpose." "Thank you kindly, sir," she answered, "but I couldn't sleep away from home for a night. I'm in greenhouse charity, and if I slept a night away from my rooms I should lose all I've got to live on. The rules is very strict, and there's too many watching for a vacancy for me to run any risk in that matter. Only for that, sir, I'd gladly come here and attend on you altogether during your stay." "My good woman," said Malcolmson hastily, "I've come here on purpose to obtain solitude, and believe me that I am grateful to the late Greenhow for having so organized this admirable charity. Whatever it is that I'm perforce denied the opportunity of suffering from such a form of temptation. St. Anthony himself could not be more rigid on the point." The old woman laughed. "Ah, you young gentlemen, you don't fear for naught, and belike you'll get all the solitude you want here." She set to work with her cleaning, and by nightfall, when Malcolmson returned from his walk, he always had one of his books to study as he walked, he found the room swept, tidied, a fire burning in the old hearth, the lamp lit, and the table spread for supper with Mrs. Whitman's excellent fare. "This is comfortable indeed," he said as he rubbed his hands. When he finished his supper and lifted the tray to the other end of the great oak dining table, he got out his books again, put fresh wood on the fire, trimmed his lamp, and set himself down to a spell of real hard work. He went on without pause till about 11 o'clock, when he knocked off for a bit to fix his fire and lamp, and to make himself a cup of tea. He had always been a tea drinker, and during his college life had sat late at work and had taken tea late. The rest was a great luxury to him, and he enjoyed it with a sense of delicious, voluptuous ease. The renewed fire leapt and sparkled, and threw quaint shadows through the great old room, and as he sipped his hot tea, he revelled in the sense of isolation from his kind. Then it was that he began to notice for the first time what a noise the rats were making. "Surely," he thought, "they cannot have been at it all the time I was reading. Had they been, I must not have noticed it." Presently, when the noise increased, he satisfied himself that it was really new. It was evident that at first the rats had been frightened at the presence of a stranger, and the light of fire and lamp, but that as the time went on they had grown bolder, and were now disporting themselves as was their wont. How busy they were! And hark to the strange noises! Up and down behind the old wainscot, over the ceiling, and under the floor they raced and gnawed and scratched. Malcolm smiled to himself as he recalled to mind the saying of Mrs. Dempster, "Boogies is rats, and rats is boogies." The tea began to have its effect of intellectual and nervous stimulus. He saw with joy another long spell of work to be done before the night was past, and in the sense of security which it gave him, he allowed himself the luxury of a good look around the room. He took his lamp in one hand and went all around, wondering that so quaint and beautiful an old house had been so long neglected. The carving of the oak on the panels of the wainscot was fine, and on and around the doors and windows it was beautiful, and of rare merit. Here were some old pictures on the walls, but they were coated so thick with dust and dirt that he could not distinguish any details, though he held his lamp as high as he could over his head. Here and there as he went round he saw some crack or hole blocked for a moment by the face of a rat, with its bright eyes glittering in the light. But in an instant it was gone, and a squeak and a scamper followed. The thing that most struck him, however, was the rope of a great alarm bell on the roof, which hung down in a corner of the room on the right-hand side of the fireplace. He pulled up close to the hearth a great high-backed carved oak chair and sat down to his last cup of tea. When this was done, he made up the fire and went back to work, sitting at the corner of the table, having the fire to his left. For a while the rats disturbed him somewhat with their perpetual scampering, but he got accustomed to the noise as one does to the ticking of a clock or to the roar of moving water, and he became so immersed in his work that everything in the world, except the problem which he was trying to solve, passed away from him. It's interesting reading that there are probably people listening to this who have no idea what a ticking clock sounds like. He suddenly looked up, his problem still unsolved, and there was in the air that sense of the hour before dawn, which is so dread to doubtful life. The noise of the rats had ceased. Indeed, it seemed to him it must have ceased but lately, and that it was sudden cessation which had disturbed him. The fire had fallen low, but still it threw out a deep red glow. As he looked, he started in spite of his sang-froid. There, on the great high-backed carved oak chair, by the right side of the fireplace, sat an enormous rat, steadily glaring at him with baleful eyes. He made a motion to it as though to hunt it away, but it did not stir. Then he made the motion of throwing something. It did not stir. It showed its great white teeth angrily, and its cruel eyes shone in the lamplight with an added vindictiveness. Malcolmson felt amazed, and seizing the poker from the hearth, ran at it to kill it. Before, however, he could strike, the rat, with a squeak that sounded like the concentration of hate, jumped upon the floor, and running up the rope of the alarm bell, disappeared in the darkness. Instantly, strange to say, the noisy scampering of the rats in the wainscot began again. By this time, Malcolmson's mind was quite off the problem, and as a shrill cock-crow outside told him of the approach of morning, he went to bed and to sleep. Not sure after something like that I could, settle down and drift off, but our character does. He slept so sound that he was not even waked by Mrs. Dempster coming in to make up his room. It was only when she had tidied up the place and got his breakfast ready and tapped on the screen which closed in his bed that he woke. He was a little tired still after his night's hard work, but a strong cup of tea soon freshened him up, and taking his book, he went out for his morning walk, bringing with him a few sandwiches, lest he should not care to return till dinner time. He found a quiet walk between high elms some way outside the town, and here he spent the greater part of the day studying his Laplace. On his return, he looked in to see Mrs. Whitman and to thank her for her kindness. When she saw him coming through the diamond-paned bay window of her sanctum, she came out to meet him and asked him in. She looked at him searchingly and shook her head as she said, "You must not overdo it, sir. You are paler this morning than you should be. 2 late hours and 2 hard work on the brain isn't good for any man. But tell me, sir, how did you pass the night?" "Well, I hope, but my heart, sir, I was glad when Mrs. Dempster told me this morning that you were all right and sleeping sound when she went in." "Oh, I was all right," he answered, smiling. "The somethings didn't worry me as yet. Only the rats, and they had a circus, I tell you, all over the place. There was one wicked-looking old devil that sat up on my chair by the fire and wouldn't go till I took the poker to him. and then he ran the rope of the alarm bell and got somewhere up the wall or the ceiling. I couldn't see where, it was so dark. Mercy on us, said Mrs. Whitman. An old devil, and sitting on a chair by the fireside. Take care, sir, take care. There's many a true word spoken in jest. How do you mean? 'Pon my word, I don't understand. An old devil, the old devil, perhaps. There, you needn't laugh, for Malcolmson had broken into a hearty peal. You young folks think it's easy to laugh at things that make older ones shudder. Never mind, sir, never mind. Please God you laugh all the time. It's what I wish for you myself. And the good lady beamed all over in sympathy with his enjoyment, her fears gone for a moment. Oh, forgive me, said Malcolmson presently. Don't think me rude, but the idea was too much for me, that the old devil himself was on the chair last night, and at the thought he laughed again. Then he went home to dinner. This evening the scampering of the rats began earlier. Indeed, it had been going on before his arrival, and only ceased whilst his presence by its freshness disturbed them. After dinner he sat by the fire for a while and had a smoke, and then, having cleared his table, began to work as before. Tonight the rats disturbed him more than they had on the previous night. How they scampered up and down, over and under! How they squeaked, scratched, and gnawed! How they, getting bolder by degrees, came to the mouths of their holes, and to the chinks and cracks and crannies in the wainscoting, till their eyes shone like tiny lamps as the firelight rose and fell. But to him, now doubtless accustomed to them, their eyes were not wicked, only their playfulness touched him. Sometimes the boldest of them made sallies out on the floor or along the mouldings of the wainscot. Now and again, as they disturbed him, Malcolmson made a sound to frighten them, smiting the table with his hand, or giving a fierce hish, hish, so that they fled straight away to their holes. And so the early part of the night wore on, and despite the noise, Malcolmson got more and more immersed in his work. All at once he stopped, as on the previous night, being overcome by a sudden sense of silence. There was not the faintest sound of gnaw, scratch, or squeak. The silence was as of the grave. He remembered the odd occurrence of the previous night, and instinctively he looked at the chair by the fireside. Then a very odd sensation thrilled through him. There, on the great old high-backed carved oak chair, beside the fireplace, sat the same enormous rat, steadily glaring at him. Instinctively, he took the nearest thing to his hand, a book of logarithms, and flung it at the rat. The book was badly aimed, and the rat did not stir. So again the poker performance of the previous night was repeated, and again the rat fled up the rope of the alarm bell. Strangely, too, the departure of this rat was instantly followed by the renewal of the noise made of the general rat community. On this occasion, as on the previous one, Malcolmson could not see at what part of the room the rat disappeared, for the green shade of his lamp left the upper part of the room in darkness, and the fire had burned low. On looking at his watch, when he found it close to midnight, and not sorry for the diversion, he made up his fire and made himself his nightly pot of tea. He had got through a good spell of work, and thought himself entitled to a cigarette, and so he sat on the great carved oak chair before the fire and enjoyed it. While smoking, he began to think that he would like to know where the rat disappeared, for he had certain ideas for the morrow not entirely disconnected with a rat trap. Accordingly, he lit another lamp and placed it so that it would shine well into the right-hand corner of the wall by the fireplace. Then he got all the books he had with him and placed them handy to throw at the vermin. Finally, he lifted the rope of the alarm bell and placed the end of it on the table, fixing the extreme end under the lamp. As he handled it, he could not help noticing how pliable it was, especially for so strong a rope, and one not in use. You could hang a man with it, he thought to himself.